Hello everyone, I'm Evolution World. I once said that evolution is a chaotic system. The success of an animal group ultimately depends on only one factor: luck. The strong don't always win, it's always been that way. For example, during the Cambrian explosion, everyone started from scratch in the novice village. Whoever was lucky enough to draw SSR equipment became the boss. After the Permian-Triassic mass extinction, the biological world was largely emptied. So, a similar drama played out again, only this time, the survivors on the wasteland were all equipped with late-stage gear. At this point, luck primarily manifested in their geographical location. The ancestors of mammals at that time were quite unlucky. They were trapped in the exotic southern deserts. As a result, they could only watch helplessly as the archosaurs surpassed them. However, some groups had incredibly good luck. Take today's protagonist, the ichthyosaurs, for example. Ichthyosaur ancestors lived in an area roughly equivalent to today's Hubei, Anhui, and Jiangxi provinces in China. However, at the beginning of the Triassic period, 250 million years ago, this region was a warm archipelago near the equator, with continuous shallow seas. These waters nurtured countless plankton and small animals, which in turn allowed medium-sized animals, represented by myxosaurids, to rapidly recover their numbers. Because earlier predators like Eupesicus and Placidus had disappeared in the mass extinction, these myxosaurids soon proliferated to an overwhelming degree, making this sea unusually rich in life compared to the otherwise desolate Earth. And on the islands near this myxosaurid sea lived semi-aquatic creatures that likely resembled Eupesicus. These were the ancestors of the ichthyosaurs. Was this perhaps the legendary perfect start? Moreover, the myxosaurids' shells at the time were primarily optimized for early cartilaginous fish. But ichthyosaurs, leveraging their dragon bite as members of the archosaur lineage, could easily crush myxosaurid shells. With this virtually inexhaustible food source, the ichthyosaur family began to grow and thrive. Then, naturally, the food resources were depleted. From then on, ichthyosaur ancestors had to put more effort into foraging. One lineage began to reduce their body size and increase agility to catch more nimble prey, such as smaller myxosaurids and fish. Examples include Symbospondylus and Myxosaurus. They looked like seals with long tails, and their limbs had evolved into paddles. These features indicate that they already spent most of their time in the sea. However, do you really think developing in the sea was all fun and games? You're wrong. You can't even imagine the joy of going fully aquatic. Ichthyosaur ancestors instantly, immediately, and completely abandoned land. Closely following them came Chaohurus. Although their bodies still resembled lizards, their spindle-shaped bodies and fish-like tails clearly indicated that these animals were likely marine creatures in every sense. More importantly, Chaohurus developed ovoviviparity, meaning they could reproduce offspring without returning to land. Around the same time as Chaohurus, Ichthyosaurus had already reached what is now Japan, indicating that these animals already possessed the ability for long-distance oceanic migrations. They marked a significant milestone in the evolutionary history of terrestrial animals, becoming pioneers in returning to the sea. From this point, ichthyosaurs were truly born. What made the sea so great, you ask? This brings us to a unique historical opportunity. At that time, sharks had not yet recovered from the devastating aftermath of the Permian-Triassic mass extinction. And plesiosaurs, who would later become the ichthyosaurs' strongest competitors, had not yet emerged. Ichthyosaurs, accidental oceanic apex predators, suddenly, and almost by accident, ichthyosaurs became the ultimate creatures in the ocean. Imagine if, one day, all the gaming pros mysteriously went offline, and you, a total novice, suddenly started winning every match. How thrilling would that be? That's why, looking at the entire 50 million year Triassic period, the evolution of ichthyosaurs, to me, feels utterly uninspired. The ichthyosaur family rose to prominence by eating myxosaurids. But even after reaching apex predator status, all they could think about was still eating myxosaurids. Okay, fine, their diet might have expanded to include fish and ammonites, and perhaps some small cephalopods. But very rarely did it include any vertebrates larger than a meter. Take the pitiful Bessinosaurus, for example. They developed a sluggish, eel-like body and spent their days in coastal reefs, playing King Chin avoids the column with various small animals. Seriously, you're a shallow sea giant weighing over 10 tons. Don't you have any ambition? Then there's Himalayasaurus, a colossal 15-meter creature with a massive mouth full of sharp teeth. And yet, all this thing did was chase after squid. The most infuriating of all are the Shawnosaurus. Shony head indeed. The larger species among them could reach over 20 meters in length, considered the largest marine reptiles in history. Yet, they too only hunted squid. And to top it off, they even degenerated their teeth just to swallow squid. Animal evolution that fails to strive, it's usually because they're pampered. A good beating would set them straight. As it turned out, at the end of the Triassic, a series of disasters caused a massive collapse among marine mollusks. And with that, all those giant cephalopod-obsessed ichthyosaurs collectively went to meet their old gods. I'm just asking you, weren't those things like plesiosaurs, pliosaurs, or even smaller ichthyosaurs appealing? It was only then that ichthyosaurs finally realized, haha, they are appealing. Very appealing. Around 200 million years ago, the Temnodontosaurus, about 10 meters long, finally represented the ichthyosaur family and, for the very first time, ascended to the throne of apex predator. This also marked the first time that an amniote became the undisputed ruler of the open ocean. However, Temnodontosaurus ultimately arrived too late. By this time, it was already the early Jurassic. In the shallow seas, the plesiosaurs, who had started with terrible conditions, had already completed their 50-million-year period of endurance and were about to evolve into the ultimate killing machines known as pliosaurs. Meanwhile, the earliest marine crocodiles were also about to swim into the ocean to join this deadly game, and in the deep sea, sharks finally returned from their ancient slumber. One lineage among them would soon evolve into the true sharks, a group that has produced countless top predators. The title of oceanic overlord was ultimately powerless against the wheels of history. Temnodontosaurus barely held on to its reign for the ichthyosaur family for 25 million years. This silent, final kingdom became the swan song of the ichthyosaur dynasty. From the mid-Jurassic onwards, the ichthyosaur family began to show some very distinct changes. On one hand, they became even more fish-like than their ancestors. Their slender bodies transformed into plump, spindle shapes. They also developed a dorsal fin and a symmetrical, fish-like tail. At the same time, their eyes became enormous. In fact, many ichthyosaurs still hold the record for the largest eyes among animals of comparable size, even today. All of this points to a sad truth. Ichthyosaurs began to gradually withdraw from the rich shallow seas, like a group of banished old retainers from a previous dynasty, forced to migrate to the harsh, distant open ocean to live out their lives. Their plump bodies also allowed them to store more fat and oxygen, enabling them to traverse the vast open ocean and dive into deeper waters. Their enormous eyes were primarily for seeking food in the gloomy depths that other marine life couldn't reach. However, relying on depth as a refuge was merely a temporary solution. Pliosaurs, plesiosaurs, and marine crocodiles wouldn't forever be content with shallow waters. While they might not have been able to prey on ichthyosaurs directly, they would at least claim some of their food resources and habitats. And on the other side, sharks would never give up their relentless pursuit. These were truly ruthless competitors. What's more, by this point, ichthyosaurs were no longer the speed ceiling of the ocean. Mountains and rivers shattered, wind-blown willow catkins scattered, my life floats like a bottle in the rain. The relentless encroachment of these new predators gradually constricted the ichthyosaurs' living space. At this moment, fate also abandoned the ichthyosaurs. From over 140 million years ago, in the Cretaceous period, a group of highly agile fish, the teleosts, which are the most common fish family today, began to rise universally, becoming the dominant swimming animals in the ocean. This finally made ichthyosaurs experience the despair of being unable to catch their prey. Even the myxosaurids, the ichthyosaurs' traditional canned meat, became defiant. In the Cretaceous, many large, heavily armored myxosaurids appeared, floating in the sea as if mocking the ichthyosaur's weak biting force. Around 90 million years ago, in the mid-Cretaceous, the oceans suffered another major anoxic event of unknown cause, known as the Cenomanian-Turonian extinction event. This became the final straw that broke the back of the ichthyosaur family, besieged by internal and external pressures. Approximately 94 million years ago, the last known ichthyosaur species completely vanished from the vast oceans. However, even as the last ichthyosaurs clung to survival, in what is now Europe, an animal resembling Pakicetus was steadily transforming its body into a fish-like shape. And over 40 million years after that, in what is today Pakistan, another animal, similar to Basilosaurus, decided to venture into the sea. I often think, despite their unremarkable existence, ichthyosaurs spent their entire lives caught in a whirlpool of destiny, beyond their control. Yet, they distinctly witnessed the greatest revolution in marine history. Their spiritual successors would also follow their path, constantly moving forward. So, was it the era that created heroes, or did heroes create the era? Today's video ends here. Thank you for watching the whole video, and don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel and leave comments to give me feedback. Thank you all.